Do you want to stop the music?
Hi, Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and co-chair of Denver Startup Week, the largest free entrepreneurial event in the world, and it's only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors. We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to make DSW possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Xero. Our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible: Battery 621 in the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now let's get to it.
Quizlet is a global learning platform that provides engaging study tools to help people practice and master whatever they're learning. Every month, over 50 million people use Quizlet to study any subject imaginable, for school, work, or as part of their personal interests.
Quizlet is super efficient, and I often, walk to class with it on my phone or even just before I go to sleep.
Combining cognitive science and machine learning, Quizlet guides students through adaptive study activities to confidently reach their learning goals. Quizlet has over 200 employees across 3 offices in San Francisco, Denver, and London.
Being at the Denver Quizlet office for the last year has been pretty incredible. Seeing the office grow while maintaining its, core connections to our values. It's been an incredible experience to be a part of, seeing how humble, candid, and open everyone has been, and being part of a mission-driven company in a time of uncertainty has been incredibly rewarding. So I look forward to, what the future brings, because the last year has been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Quizlet.
Hey everyone, my name's Adam Bauman and I'm part of the Quizlet team here in Denver. I'm proud to work for a company whose goal is to help every single person on this earth become a better lifelong learner. One of my favorite things about working at Quizlet is how much we follow our company values. There's always learning opportunities. We encourage everybody to teach themselves something new, as well as help each other learn. Whether it's from art classes or lunch and learn talks on latest technologies, there's always something new to find and help yourself grow. And I really feel like that's one of the best things that any company can offer is growth and opportunity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Connor Swanson, the Developer Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual Denver Startup Week. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we are more powerful when we come together as a community to share ideas and help make each other better. And here we are, virtually, showing the world what Denver is made of. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, and the combination of those identities. There is something for everyone at DSW. Thank you for joining us. Thanks again to all of our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep Denver Startup Week free and accessible for all, and especially thank you to Quizlet for supporting the developer track. With that said, I'm very excited to introduce you to our panelists for this fireside chat. I met Nick, currently the VP of Engineering for Twitter, when he joined us several years back as part of the original Denver Startup Week Ambassador program that I helped to organize. It's quite the full circle for us to now have him joining in a keynote capacity. Our moderator for the discussion is Aaron Clark, someone I've had the chance and privilege to get to know over the last few months, who's doing some incredible work for the Colorado community. Among other things, he's the leader for the Justice Reskill program and the creator of Equity Solutions. They will take things from here. Thank you to you both.
Thank you very much, Connor. Thank you, Kate, for helping set up this session today. And always, thank you to Quizlet, our developer track sponsor. Today, I'm really excited about this session. Like Connor mentioned, he and I have got the chance to work together on some Colorado startup ecosystem projects over the last few months. And in some of those conversations, it became obvious that we had a mutual connection, Nick Caldwell. And Connor expressed to me how much Nick has done for the Colorado ecosystem in years past. And we immediately started talking about how can we get Nick back involved in the work that we're doing. COVID hit, we couldn't do a few of the ideas that we had, but Connor had something up his sleeve, which is this session today. So we're going to talk for a few minutes about, some of Nick's work and some of his experience. Before I get going, I want to let you know the Q&A is open. Nick and I are going to talk for 20, 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up. I'll moderate some questions, and I feel like most of you will have a lot of things that you want to hear from Nick and his experience. But I'll just kind of recap a few things about his background and his experience that are very informational to us here. As Connor mentioned, Nick is a VP of engineering at Twitter, where right now he leads over 700 engineers on the consumer-facing products, which is largely the app that most of us use today. Right before that, Nick was a senior director at Google for product engineering. He led the Looker team during their acquisition and integration back earlier this year. Right before that, Nick was the chief product engineering officer at Looker, led, built, scaled all their engineering teams, product teams, design teams. So a lot of work there in the developer space. Some of his previous roles are as illustrious as those other ones as well. He worked with Reddit as a VP of engineering, Microsoft, many roles, even interned at NASA and worked as a consultant. So Nick's done quite a bit in the engineering space, so he can speak to a lot of different roles that you and I have had. His education involves, he's got a bachelor's from MIT in computer science and electrical engineering, and an MBA at UC Berkeley Haas. He is a board member at DevColor, which I'll talk about in a minute, an angel investor, a speaker, and a mentor to many of us. Now, why am I here? My name, as Connor mentioned, is Aaron Clark. I'm the founder of Justice Reskill, which is a reskilling platform that teaches both technical and essential skills to justice-involved individuals, building a true path to economic stability for justice-involved folks. I'm also a member of DevColor, which is the organization advancing the careers of Black software engineers across America. And I'm very, very pleased to bring Nick into this conversation. Welcome and good morning, Nick.
Hey, Aaron, thanks a ton for that intro, and thanks, Connor, as well. It's a real pleasure to be back at Denver Startup Week. This is something I love to try and participate in wherever I get a chance. The ambassador program Connor talked about earlier was a pretty amazing introduction for me, not just to the Denver startup ecosystem, but startups in general. At that time in my career, I was only a few months into my career as a startup executive, and it was kind of cool to have the Denver Startup Week be a part of that formative process.
Yeah, what year was that you started working with Connor on that program?
This was back in 2017. So I started Reddit as VP of engineering in late 2016. And I really dove into the startup ecosystem. You have to remember, I was at Microsoft for 15 years. So I had a lot of I don't want to say bad thinking. I had a lot of stuff to learn as I made my way into the startup ecosystem. So I was spending a lot of time visiting venture capital firms and learning about angel investing, how to raise money, networking with other VPs of Eng at smaller companies. So Denver Startup Week came along, and it was a great opportunity to not only meet other startups. Some of them were pretty cool. I remember we met Go Spot Check, Ibotta, SendGrid. I think we ended up using their product after that. But it was more just educational for me to see the different sort of challenges that different startups have to face, as well as Denver as a source a place that we might expand to. So Reddit didn't end up expanding to Denver, but other companies that I worked at post Reddit, it's always come up as a go-to place. And I think with hey, for better or worse, with COVID and the move to remote work, I think that will only accelerate, people in tech looking for new hubs to go and work out of. And I think Denver is going to be one, if it's not already, it will be right up there in the top few locations.
Yeah, and that ambassador program that Connor helped pilot many years ago, that's come up in the last year or two, both with Denver Startup Week and Boulder Startup Week. And the idea around that, I don't know that Connor had the realization that what he was building was really an equity and inclusion kind of program. And the idea was, how do we open up a little bit more and allow people to come and see, what we have going on in this particular state. And for those that are uninitiated, the state of Colorado does a really good job of inclusion in terms of allowing people to bring their ideas to the table. And so it sounds like that, those are around some of the same conversations you had. And many of those companies you've mentioned started in Colorado and have grown. SendGrid recently acquired by Twilio. Ibotta is doing very, very well. The team there is, known across the state as blazing the trails, in many ways. So it's really great to see that you're back involved in some capacity and just putting a plug in, for you to continue to be involved in some of the stuff that Connor and the ecosystem out here is being built.
I'll do my best, but I think the wind's in your sails. It seems like every other conversation I have with leaders in tech nowadays is about remote work and remote offices. And, I think Denver got a head start. When I was there in 2017 was maybe the beginning of an upward inflection point. And now you're going to get flooded. You'll regret having put all this effort in with all these tech folks to show up and take everything over. 16th Street will never be the same.
Yeah. We don't want to repeat a Silicon Valley. We'll try and measure it at least to some extent. But, folks can read a lot about your bio and your background. And after this, I'll share a couple of links so folks can, dive in deeper. I love your story. We've talked about it many, many times. But, in my work with folks that are getting involved in tech, I was trying to dive into where their passion is at. And something stuck out with yours. You've had a great career, worked for a number of, large companies, small companies, and got to experience a lot of things. But, if you can remember, take us back to early Nick days, young 10-year-old Nick, just getting your start in tech. Like, do you remember that story? Do you remember the emotion you felt when you first started getting involved in tech or coding per se?
Yeah. So my first exposure to tech I was very young. I was like sitting on my dad's lap while he did his casework on a Tandy 1000. But I would claim later on, like when I was around 10, he bought me this book called Learn C++ in 12 Easy Lessons, which is a lie. But the thing I remember about that book is like the first chapter is like just how to even set up your compiler, and the second chapter is which took me at that time like half a day. But the second chapter is write a Hello World program, and I spent probably a day or two messing around until I could get to the point to write Hello World in C++, like setting up the compiler, figuring out the syntax and all that sort of stuff. And I remember like after it printed out, I went and grabbed my parents to show them. I was so proud of what I'd done, and they could not possibly have cared less. And I think that's kind of the test for whether or not you're going to love tech. It's like you put all of this energy into trying to make the machine or the system do something programmatically, and like feeling so empowered that you were able to pull that off. And the first time I did that, I remember being super proud, and I think other people might have taken that moment and been like, wow, a lot of effort went into me being able to print one sentence. I think I'll go learn football instead. And I can understand that. But for me, it was amazing. I took that energy and went, I was very passionate about video gaming, as most 80s nerds were. And I took that skill and immediately went to try and build video games. And I ended up building what was at the time BBS door games. So I set up my own bulletin board system, set up my own games for it, wrote extensions to other pre-existing games. And, the important thing about this was, for me at the time, I was the only person in my neighborhood, like really even exposed to this technology. So I was like speaking a different language, and it gave me a whole different perspective on opportunity. And I very quickly, through using BBSs and the early internet, got exposure to people who weren't in my state, people in other countries. And it gave me a sort of idea that like, hey, this could be a path to much greater opportunity. So I threw myself into learning tech. I eventually got all the way through 12 chapters of learning C++. And I won't claim I was good at it. I don't think anyone who claims that they're good at C++ is telling the truth. But you can get good enough at it to be employed, which is what I managed to achieve. And it really did become a pathway to many, 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 many future opportunities. And, I think I'm still in awe of it to this day. I think that it's only gotten, I was talking to someone yesterday about TensorFlow, and my proclaimed area of expertise when I was at MIT was machine learning. And if I were to compare what I was doing back then in 2000, in the early 2000s, compared to what like an intern can do now with TensorFlow and like 15 minutes of free time, it's amazing how far the abstraction layers have come, how much the compute power has come, and it's only accelerating. So, tech continues to keep me in awe. So I'll stop there. You guys are all fans of tech. I don't need to convince you.
I love it. I was reminiscing of teaching fourth graders how to code using Scratch. And the same thing, I started with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I thought I had it bad. C++ is much worse. I thought I was doing the wrong language, but teaching how to code in Scratch and just seeing, non-technology little kids like making actual games and sharing and, basically refactoring code with drag and drop. So, I definitely feel that, as some of us legacy folks kind of move up in the world, they're going to run right past us. But, for most folks that are in tech, I know in my career, I've had quite a few times where I'm like, this is challenging. I'm going to go do something else. Tell us about some of the times that, through your career that you just hit a challenging period, a period that was like, this is overwhelming, and tell us a little bit about how you kind of push through that to get to, a place where it's a little more efficient, more workable for you.
Huh, that's interesting. I think I'm well known to be someone who throws himself into the fire nonstop. So I don't know if I'll have an end state to this where it's like, oh, and suddenly I became a more well-balanced human being. So fortunately, that's not how my story ends. But I think there's kind of two roles I've had in my career that I would consider the most challenging, because they involved not just like technical problems, but just like personal growth. I think changing your own mentality or the way that you think about the world is ultimately, for me anyway, been more challenging than maybe like learning a new JavaScript library or something like that. So the first one was at Microsoft, working on a product called Power BI. So maybe there's some people in the audience who know what this is, but Microsoft was working on a new SaaS-based approach to business intelligence. And I was on the founding team of that. And the reason it was so difficult had to do with the circumstances around why the team was formed. So Microsoft at that time, I don't know what Microsoft is like today. I've been there in a while, but like at that time it was very high pressure. You had Steve Ballmer and Gates running around and that whole thing. And the way it had set up the structure of this team was like, either you're successful at this project or we're going to go acquire another BI company and you guys can all find something else to do. So I was kind of like thrown into this mix where we had this mentality. We just had to succeed quickly at all costs with this sort of internal startup at a big company. And it was the most exhausting and rewarding work I think I've ever done in my life. We went from relatively small team of folks, 15-ish folks, skeleton crew. And by the time we had left, by the time I left about 3 years later, a team was like 300 people. We had a product family with 5 products. And I was exhausted because it was a brand new sort of SaaS service built on top of the Azure stack. And because it was a new, I won't even go into that. Because it was a new product and we had a lot of reliability issues, there were many, many, many late nights where I was up at like 2 a.m. with my architect, trying to slog through service reliability issues. And because I was like the face of the product at one point, many of the biggest customers, I remember Metrobank, the CEO of Metrobank had my personal cell phone number. Could text me when things were screwed up. So that was really, really high pressure. But at the end of it, I had learned how what it fixed in me was the ability to execute with clear direction under constrained resources. And it provided me a level of focus that I had never had in my career. Now, the second most challenging thing came shortly after that, which was I just done a startup at Microsoft. And I was thinking to myself, hey, I should probably, after 15 years of Microsoft and having done something brand new successfully, go do an actual startup. And I decided, like, after 15 years of working my way up through the executive ranks at that company and launching a new product line, and growing this 300-person team to leave and go to Reddit, which was at that point a Series B startup, 35 engineers. At that time, the reputation was like super damaged. There was a lot of reputational debt that needed to happen. But it was the right thing to do for me. I think, like, career-wise, if I had not made that bet, I would never have been satisfied in my career. If I'd stayed at one big company and just done it forever, there would always have been that, what if question mark. And it was a super painful decision, the toughest one I've ever made, but it turned out to be the right one.
Wow, very nice. Yeah, that leads me to the point, folks that are not engineers or involved in tech don't understand that a lot of times there's movement amongst careers. And I think it's that insatiable feeling of needing to accomplish the next thing, either in your personal life or your career. So I hear that coming out in your story. Now, on the other side of that, there are roles that you get that are incredibly easy. I remember one that, to this day, the person, I was working as a freelance developer, the person handed me an insane amount of money to literally build an XML template that is not. So you just basically put some code in, it spits out an audio file, literally nothing. But it was in a day and time where that was a big deal, almost 10 years ago. So, like, take us to a time of a role that was just like cake. You just breeze through it and you're like, why am I getting paid to do this work?
And like, I don't know if I have any examples of that caliber. There's one I had early on. I think most of my jobs, I intentionally find things that are incredibly difficult. So I don't have one that I would necessarily is easy, because if I find myself in an easy position, it's maybe my personality. The instant things start to get too comfortable, I'd start looking for something else to do. It's just my nature. But I do remember maybe the first example of this, which you touched on earlier. I had this job. It was like the first or second job in my career, was that role at NASA, which on paper, I guess it was really fun. I learned a lot. It was cool to be a part of that institute. And the challenge, though, is government work is a lot slower than private sector. So the project I was working on was a high energy solar spectral imager, and I worked on some of the robotic control functions for it. And I was there doing that internship every summer and a bit through during my schooling for almost 3 years. And even after 3 years, it took another 3 years for the satellite to actually launch. When it launched, it exploded. Then they had to take another year or two to relaunch it. So it wasn't until several years later that the work I'd done, actually got into space. And I just remember during that time, it's like you're surrounded by this fantastic technology, but the pace for me was so slow. So for better or worse, I ultimately decided, like, I never wanted to be in that sort of position where I didn't feel challenged day to day and some sense of urgency. For me, it's like, I like to dive unarmed into the jungle and come out with an awesome team and an awesome product. Like, that's how I think about navigating opportunities.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, it seems like you've done that in 2020. We're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. After the death of George Floyd, we're in the middle of a racial reckoning around the world, and you went to a company at Twitter where, literally every day Twitter is in the news for political and social reasons. It's become a source of information around the world. And so, you're one of the responsible people who make sure that that keeps going and that it gets expanded. When you all make decisions, it affects so many people, and you hear about it from us, good or bad. So like, take us to, earlier in 2020 when you're making this decision, what were those conversations like? What helped you decide to jump over, and what was the first week or two like at Twitter in the middle of these pandemics?
So yeah, you sort of kind of previewed why I made this decision, but I'll go back to that moment. I had been integrating Looker into Google. We were acquired, so I'd been helping the team integrate into the Google organization for several months, effectively since June of last year. And as that situation started to stabilize, and I felt comfortable that Looker was in good hands, I kind of popped my head up and said, hey, what could I be doing next that would be super meaningful? So I looked at a lot of different opportunities. And long story short, I noticed at that time, even pre-COVID, pre-Black Lives Matter, that Twitter was becoming a place where news breaks, or the way the world thinks about the news gets processed. That is to say, Twitter is becoming the way that the world thinks about what's happening. And it's reaching more and more people. So I thought to myself, like, you've got this new sort of communication platform. Same way that you've got like the printing press or radio or television. It's a new medium for people to communicate with each other across the world. And boy, like, we better make sure that this thing is well taken care of, that like this powerful platform is available to people in a way that is as safe and healthy as possible. So from a perspective of doing something meaningful, I wanted to be a part of the team that was going to make that happen. And now, separate from that, when I joined, I mean, it was like literally a week into me joining Twitter. First was COVID, then it was Black Lives Matter. Now, the Black Lives Matter situation, like, just real talk, that was devastating. Like, as a Black person in America, separate from talking about Twitter and onboarding and so forth, myself and everyone I knew was wrecked for at least like a week or two. And many of us are still sort of trying to recover from the emotional trauma there. The good thing about Twitter in terms of how it supported that was in my second week there, I could already see that folks had sort of spun into action to provide support to Black employees. Twitter has a employee resource group called Blackbirds, which started hosting events. We had Martin Luther King's daughter come and talk. We had many public figures come and share support internally. Jack, the CEO, did a series of events. And just on a personal note, Jack also has been using his nonprofit foundation. During that week, he announced he was going to donate very significantly to multiple nonprofits related to COVID relief and Black Lives Matter. I actually suggested one to him, and he picked it up and donated to it. So the company has been incredibly supportive, both in terms of ERGs, giving people time off, mental support, et cetera. And I found that personally very rewarding, and I'm glad that the company cares so much. So I'll stop there. But I think we're far from done with that situation.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Many of our colleagues, Deaf Color, as an organization, it's all Black software engineers, and we meet, at least on a monthly basis with our squads and just have conversations like this around, how we're feeling. And what you're sharing is literally what I've heard from every single person that I know, which is it's been a very, very, very heavy time this last, 3+ months. And everyone around the U.S. is carrying on, whether you support Black Lives Matter, the movement part of it, or simply just a worker, going through COVID is difficult for all of us. So, speaking on the engineering side, like, what are the challenges that you're working through now at Twitter? What are the things that kind of take up your time? Is it more things on the technical side, or is it more things on the personal side of where we're at in our world? Or what's keeping you up at night?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I think, when I got the job, it was primarily around solving some of the scaling challenges that Twitter's having right now. Twitter is at this inflection point with increased usage, and they want to grow the R&D function. And one of my particular skill sets is organizational design and execution at scale. This is something I'm particularly passionate about. So most of my time right now is thinking about how we take Twitter, make it operate more effectively so that we can serve our mission, which is public conversation, which I was talking about earlier. To do that, like, we have to have better internal tools, better methods for execution to address quality and so forth and so on. Secondary to that, there's some other important initiatives. Globalization, that is to say, decentralizing our workforce. With remote work, I think this is only going to become more important. But I'm spending a lot of time thinking about which offices outside of San Francisco we should open, and how are we going to attract talent in these new regions, not just in US locations, but around the world. Like for Twitter to reach its full potential as serving the public conversation, that needs to happen around the world. So some thought needs to be put into new international office locations. And then finally, like going back to what we were talking about earlier, I'm spending increasing amounts of time thinking about what we call organizational shaping. So it's not just the idea that we expand to different regions, but looking at it from the perspective of inclusion and diversity. Do we have the right gender and ethnic targets? And do we have the mechanisms in place to fill our candidate pipeline with great diverse talent? And I do think, like, the move to remote work should open new avenues for us to hire folks outside of necessarily the San Francisco area and get at new sources for diverse talent. So those are the things that are sort of top of mind for me right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'll definitely put a plug in for the Front Range. We've got an office right there in Boulder and some folks in Denver. So, we'd love to help you build out there. And you touched on, the diversity and inclusion side of it. As Black engineers, there's a lot of work we do, both, in the actual technical job functions, but also around inclusion and making sure that, everyone has a seat at the table and has a voice. And without getting too far into this, we're going to go to Q&A in just a minute. You do a lot of work on this, both direct and indirect. But, as a board member of DevColor, which I mentioned earlier, you do a lot of talks with all of our members around, how you've grown or start off as an engineer to the different roles that you've had. So you help a lot of people out with that. You mentor people, you're an angel investor. I personally know that you've spoke to a lot of people and helped them with their careers. So, my last question is, kind of the why that, that Nick has. Why do you support or have a passion around helping, BIPOC folks in tech and advance? What's your reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a two-part answer. The first is, if you kind of replay my career trajectory, I spent a lot of time in Seattle working for Microsoft. And unfortunately, this is not the most diverse place on the planet. And I went all of my tech career without seeing another, in Microsoft, without seeing another Black tech exec. And I'd sort of gotten into the mentality like, okay, well, I guess that's the way it is. Nothing I can do about it. When I moved to San Francisco and encountered the DevColor organization, I went to the first meeting. There was a room, 300 plus Black people in tech, including folks at all experience levels. And for me, this was like, I didn't even know it was possible. It was a switch flipped. It was transformative. It's like this thing that I didn't even know was possible is happening here at DevColor. And that in combination with being in the Bay Area and getting to learn more about venture capital and the opportunities associated with that made me realize that the Bay Area and the tech scene in general is the greatest source of wealth generation there is. And unfortunately, it is not equitably available to everybody. And it became, for me, very important to try and help people of color find ways into these opportunity spaces, like giving them the advice, the networking, and the confidence to try and take the risks which are necessary to reap the rewards of these opportunities. So that's why it matters to me. I think if you've got an engine which is producing the greatest wealth and opportunity on the planet, and it is not equitably available to everybody, something is fundamentally wrong. And we have to, try and find ways to correct that. For me, it's about teaching people, how, who they need to talk to, the ways in which those opportunities are made available. All of this stuff is actually fairly practical and straightforward, but because people of color don't necessarily have the right networks to get that advice, even if the advice is simple, you can't get it if you're not connected to the right people. So for me, I'm trying to send the ladder back down and just make sure that folks who are coming up have an easier path than the one that I had to go down. So I'll stop there.
I love that. Just that helping other folks navigate the systems of power and privilege that we get to benefit from by being in tech. Tech is one of those things that just adds fuel to, a career path, largely because of a lot of the wealth and the access that we have. So I really appreciate hearing, how you're lending your privilege to other folks so they can, enjoy some of the things that you've been able to enjoy. So I want to switch over to a few questions if that's okay with you.
Let's do it. I see them coming in now. Let's see.
Yeah. And there's a couple that just really, that dovetail on what you just said, which, I know you have heard this every time that you speak to new developers, and even some developers that are a little further along, which is the concept of imposter syndrome. I know for me in my career, it started off, then it left, and then it came back as you get older. But talk to us about your experience with helping people or yourself, get over imposter syndrome.
Well, I think, to be honest, I don't think anyone ever gets over imposter syndrome. So the way that I tell people to think about imposter syndrome isn't necessarily to get over it. It's just that it's a feeling that everyone who is pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone feels. And you should be okay with that. Like, I look at imposter syndrome, for myself anyway, as more of an indicator that I'm in a zone where I'm going to learn something. And I think about it as an opportunity. The thing that I worry more about is people who don't necessarily have the confidence to take on new opportunities when they present themselves. And I call this just happy to be here syndrome. So I personally experienced that and had it affect my career in a much more negative way than imposter syndrome per se. And that is to say, for a long time in my career at Microsoft, I was like, wow, I'm super happy to have this job. My parents were, I'm a public school teacher and a public defender, and we didn't have a ton of money. And now I'm at Microsoft and I'm making a lot. And I'd better not screw it up. So for a long time, I was just happy that I had gotten into tech at all. And I had this mentality, like, no matter what would come down the pipeline, if my manager was maybe acting up or doing things that might require me to stay incredibly late or being rude to me, hey, I'm just happy to be here. I'll take it. And it wasn't until later on in my career that I realized that my knowledge, skill, and abilities meant that I didn't have to settle. So I try and encourage people of color, particularly those who come from little means to start with, that their entry point to tech is just the start. Like, don't get stuck just being happy to be there. Like, grow your skills and remember that as your worth increases, you should commensurately start asking for and seeking out larger and larger opportunities, but never just accept and tell yourself, I'm just happy to even have this role. The sky's the limit in tech. I haven't found the limit yet. And you have to get into a mentality that we're in an opportunity-rich environment. And it's a big transition to make that mental switch. It was for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like a stay hungry, consistent mentality. One of the questions is centering around some of the talks that you've given around telling newer developers and newer engineers to get other skills outside of the core technology skills. So considering where our world is at today, are there specific disciplines and skills that you would tell folks to gather as they're starting off, if they're looking at a role like you've had?
Yeah, this is super important. It took me a long time to realize this. It's funny, like all the advice I give people, I kind of gloss over the fact that it took me like 10 years to figure it out myself. So at one point in my career, I was fortunate to have lunch with some folks from the Microsoft legal team. And at that point in my career, I was like, who are these folks? They're just here to stop me from shipping code. And I thought that, coding was everything. And I didn't have a full picture of how the business comes together to ship product. And so these legal folks were eating salad or whatever. And they were telling me what they were doing. And they had been executing a patent lawsuit for Android-related mobile technologies that had made Microsoft like $2 billion. And, kind of caused me to like step back and think a little bit, because these lawyers, a small group of 6 lawyers had made the company $2 billion. And I was like, wow, let me reset. And long story short, I started to examine other functions and how they all contribute to the product lifecycle and shipping product, and came to appreciate how everything needs to come together to get the software out the door and into customers' hands. And I tell engineers this so they don't make the same mistake that I did early on, which is to say that coding doesn't solve everything. Like you and your product manager, your designer, right? Start there, but then even think more broadly, like your product marketing folks, your sales team, all of these folks play a role in making the company successful. And then you as a leader, the more you can understand how these disciplines work, what motivates them and how it all fits together, the better teammate you'll be. And also it'll open up opportunities for you later on. So like my career path took me from engineering to product into general management. And the only way I would have been able to, and obviously into exec roles, the only way I would have been able to take that course of career is if I had appreciated the way that other disciplines work and contribute along the way. So, start to learn that as quick as you can.
Yeah, it makes sense. It almost sounds like having a founder's mentality, understanding, enough about a number of different functions or roles within the organization is what it takes to really understand how your part fits into that gear of making things move forward. Which, yeah, to your point, a lot of times us developers and coders think we have the God complex, think that we do everything, but hopefully most of us are learning as we go along that that's not accurate at all.
Well, engineers are still number one. Don't twist my.
We are the narcissist of the world. Now, you mentioned TensorFlow, a few minutes ago, and I was like, ooh, TensorFlow. I was having a talk with a colleague that was working on the Google TensorFlow team and a while ago, and I was like, man, I have no desire to do that whatsoever. So like, how do you stay on top of your technical skills, while spending a lot of time doing the leadership and org development?
No, at the scale that I'm operating at, the only way that I can be aware of the latest and greatest technologies to ensure that the organization has an opportunity to explore them and surface them up. So, I first learned about TensorFlow at Reddit, where we were looking for ways to beat the Reddit hot algorithm. I don't know if you guys care about this, but Reddit has this algorithm called hot, which is how it determines what's going to rank on the front page. And we wanted to explore a machine learning approach that would replace the hand-tuned rule systems. So as a kind of experimental project, we gave our engineering team a bunch of TensorFlow credits and asked them to go explore this technology and present back to myself and the other execs like how it worked. And that for me, that pattern sort of persists. And it's, I think, a good way to stay on the bleeding edge while empowering people within your organization to make them feel that they have control and a say in the technical roadmap, like if it were up to me, like if I was responsible for like the entire breadth of technology at a company the size of Twitter or Looker, we would not be as effective as opposed to having that knowledge come from the bottoms up. People, their hands in the IDEs day to day, I think have the best understanding of what's needed. So for me, it's really about making sure those channels and opportunities exist and that those voices percolate up into the exec ranks.
Awesome, love it. Let's see. So, what are the, for folks that are looking to get into tech? We laugh about it. Entry-level jobs require 7+ years experience and all that stuff. How do you want to give some advice to people that are looking to get involved in tech and they're seeing these jobs online that have these ridiculously long requirements that they may sort of get intimidated by seeing those? What are some thoughts around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about switching into tech, there's obviously the traditional route. If you have the means and the time to go to a 4-year school, hey, go for it. But I think increasingly what we're seeing is a move toward continuous learning. And because many of the best opportunities in the job market are in tech, you're seeing people who want to take more of a career switching route. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing career switching and thinking about, I'm going to switch through by means of a 4-year college degree, probably not the best way to be spending your time right now. That is a very, very long commitment for a career switcher. So instead, I mean, I think you should look toward some of these new alternatives to 4-year degrees, such as boot camps. Boot camps have sort of exploded as an alternative that meets the need for continuing education and in a way that keeps up with technology. Like if you think about the number of like JavaScript frameworks which have been released during this call, it's like a lot of them, right? So there has to be a different way to approach education that matches the pace of development of technology. And boot camps and continuous learning programs are a new way to address that need. In terms of job requirements, like you mentioned, Aaron, you're increasingly seeing companies who acknowledge that the traditional 4-year degree is not an entry requirement, and they're moving to other ways to analyze and vet talent. Interview processes are changing, the degree requirements are changing, et cetera. Now, that said, it's not easy and it's not necessarily widespread. So I'm speaking about trends in the marketplace, not the current reality. But if you're thinking about career switching, definitely explore boot camps as a faster way to pick up practical skills. I've seen many times people, career switching through boot camps come in and become very effective to the point where like they're maybe taking on leadership roles even a year or two later. I've seen that happen multiple times. The challenge though is because the acceptance of boot camps is not yet widespread and the recruiting pipelines are still trying to figure out what to make of boot camps and the validity of these degree programs, it is a little bit more of an unpredictable sort of entry point. You can definitely learn the skills, but in terms of getting into the pipeline, it's a little bit tougher. I've seen it many times work out extremely well, but I think the challenge is you have to stay persistent, continue applying, practice. So.
And you're kind of speaking to Joey's question here, the last one, in terms of coming from a non-conventional online education system, which everything you said, I fully support. I think boot camps are a way to get more underrepresented folks involved in tech in a little bit of faster pace, especially if we can keep finding ways to support them financially during those programs so they don't have to carry any debt. But for the kind of taking that online aspect and now the new remote aspect, right? If COVID wasn't here, you might probably be sitting in a conference room somewhere, or we'd be shuttling back and forth to this conference or that conference. It's conference season. How do you give advice or recommend folks that are taking those non-traditional routes towards tech and education and in the middle of a remote, only environment to kind of learning who to connect with within a company for career advancement?
Yeah, I mean, this is always tough. I would say on the first part of that question that remote theoretically should make it easier to find opportunities. So for example, at Twitter, we're actively considering just removing the San Francisco requirement from job postings and going more toward like a time zone by time zone basis, just to make sure that teams are within a couple time zones of each other. And we're sort of expecting that, people will want to continue to work from home. There's a lot of, I could go into this as a side thread, but like we're seeing some significant benefits to work from home that I think people will want to maintain post-COVID. The biggest downside is obviously childcare, though. So like we have to get to a world in which that aspect of this problem is fixed. For non-traditional folks, that means that like theoretically there should be more opportunities available to you in different regions and so forth. The thing that still hasn't been fixed, though, just alluding to what I was saying earlier, is the just broad acceptance of non-traditional entry points. So the best ways to navigate that continue to be the same techniques you would use if you were job hunting otherwise, which is to have strong network, know people within the company to refer you, et cetera. Going to meetups to try and meet directly with people from the company and the organization, making sure that your online reputation and your knowledge, skills, and abilities are on display. All of these things are the same sort of advice that I would give to any job seeker. But for people who are coming from a non-traditional background, in 2020, you still are going to have to push a little bit harder on all of those levers than someone who necessarily has like a 4-year college degree. And I think that the prevailing winds will change that over time. That like a couple of years from now, I think we'll start to see more evolution in pipelines, and we'll see an easier path. But that you're in the midst of that change right now. Nice.
There's a question in the Q&A, and I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit, but maybe you can read it as well because it's lengthy. But I think it's very appropriate. As a VP, you're helping your team, and you mentioned a minute ago about technical challenges and how you approach that. But you've got a certain background in a number of coding languages. So with your experience, how do you help your engineers push past technical challenges? What is your advice on helping them through these tougher ones? Is it more of a lesson on kind of how to be a hacker coder mindset, or is it more of just a specific, like, this is how you fix this problem in this language?
No, I mean, look, at a certain level in your career, not even level in your career, think about the management track, and at different points in your management career, you will have to give up or gain certain things. And certainly by the time you're a VP at a significant sized company, one of the things you will have to give up is the idea that you are more expert on any specific technical decision than anyone in the organization. You will have to have built systems and processes by which architects or people who are much closer to the code base will help you surface the right decisions. And then the sorts of trade-offs that I make at this level tend to be more tech strategy, right? Should it be cloud or on-prem? If we're going to be on cloud, should it be AWS or GCP? If it's going to be GCP, do we convert some of our existing workflows over into that? And how much will it cost if we do that? Like, these are the sorts of higher level strategic decisions that a VP can make at scale. But the day-to-day technical decisions, you have to find ways to surface that deeper knowledge up and then inform it with strategy, right? So I might talk to my team about, I was actually having a conversation with someone about this the other day about video pipelining services and whether or not we should move some of our on-premise video processing capabilities into the cloud. Well, what I can say from my broad experience, having done this in several companies, is I know the cost profile, I know performance profiles, and so on and so forth. What I don't know is the specific implementations that we have. And for that knowledge, I need folks from within the organization to meet me halfway, and then we can end up making the right call for the team.
Awesome. It sounds to me like it's all about the engineering manager, really working with that, or that tech lead, making sure they are on point, because they make or break the trajectory for you. With the last couple minutes that we have left, I'm going to ask you a large question, yet I think one that you'll be able to answer. What does do the work mean to you in the context of helping your white allies be better personally and professionally around inclusion?
I think for me, if it's do the work for me, it means being patient and trying to build empathy with folks who may not have a full understanding of the challenges that people of color face in the workplace, and being willing to be occasionally lightly offended in the service of trying to educate people, and being persistent and not giving up. I won't take too much credit for necessarily, quote unquote, doing the work, because I think there are professionals who I've seen do a great job at this. I was at Looker, and there was a guy named Cornell Woodson there who was absolutely phenomenal and taught me a lot about how to encourage the development of allies, be persistent in the face of people who just don't know any better. So I think what I consider doing the work is making sure that we have the right programs to build empathy in place, that we have metrics associated with those programs so that we can actually make progress, and that we are patient, but not too patient, as we move toward this toward this better future.
Awesome. Couldn't say it any better. Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you stopping and chatting here at Denver Startup Week. Thank you to all of the attendees for your time. Thank you to Connor, the developer track, Quizlet, our sponsor. For the attendees, I put a link in the chat real quick with a number of resources in case you want to look Nick up on Twitter or LinkedIn. Twitter's got some some hires up on their website, so feel free to check those out as well. Really appreciate your time today, Nick, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Hey, thanks a ton, Aaron. This was great. Really appreciate you putting these questions together. Had a fun time.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.